Hi, this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, and you're listening to Briefings Direct. Our next thought leadership discussion explores ways that the powerful combination of deep analytics and the procurement function make businesses smarter and more efficient. A new standard or even a new corporate behavior emerges when the latest data science techniques are applied to more data sets that impact supply chains and optimize procurement. To learn how data-driven methods and best practices are transforming procurement into an impactful intelligence asset, we're now joined by David Herman, Chief Data Scientist for Strategic Procurement at SAP Ariba. Welcome to Briefings Direct, David.
Thanks, Dan. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. Why is procurement such a good place to apply the insights that we can get from data and now machine learning types of capabilities?
Well, first, it's the central hub for so many corporate activities. We have documents that range from everything from vendor proposals to purchase orders and invoices and contracts and RFXs. Lots and lots of data happens here. Not only is it rich in data, it has historically been difficult to use. So locked away inside of servers where it really couldn't be beneficial. And what we're able to do now is take that information in its unstructured format, marry it with other data, for example, from other systems or from big data sources like the news, and we're able to make really interesting insights and predictions.
And it seems to me that the payoffs are pretty good when you're at a position where any amount of waste in an organization can largely be traced to bad decisions or bad processes around procurement and spend management and supply chain.
The very nature of spend analysis is changing. We implemented a neural network last year. Its purpose was to expedite the time it takes to do a spend analysis. We dropped that time by 99%. We increased the quality and addressed more spend than we ever have before. And that's just from learning from the historical invoices that we already had in place. So the idea here is that you can see spend analysis differently. You also can do it more frequently. So you don't really have to wait for a quarter. Now you can look at this as often as you want and really be responsive to the board, who these days are looking at digital boardrooms with real-time information. That changes the role of procurement fundamentally.
So we can have a large impact. We can do it faster than ever, and we have more data that we're bringing together to solve some of these problems around insights. Why is this more than just buying and selling? It seems to me that when you combine these things, it's more than a transaction that you're starting to impact. It can be much deeper and wider.
It's strategic. And really, that's a new plateau. What we're seeing now is that instead of answering historic questions about cost savings, which are still very important, we're able to look forward and ask what-if kinds of questions. What is the scenario for how I optimize my inventory? That's not a conversation normally procurement would be involved in, but in these environments with this kind of data, they can help to forecast demand. They can forecast what would happen with price sensitivity. There are a lot of things that can happen with this data that have not so far.
And it seems to me that it's a two-way street. Not only does that information percolate up, and procurement can be a resource, but they're there to execute. So the dials are there now so that when you need to turn something up or down or adjust, the procurement people can go to work and do that for you. Again, another strategic position.
Right, and that's scary too. Let's face it. We're talking about people's livelihoods, and what we're saying is that between now and 2025, it's going to change pretty fundamentally. Between the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see positions that are going to be less likely to be there, and then we're going to have a whole new grouping of people who are more focused on analysis. Now, what that means in reality is that any kind of innovation, any kind of productivity follows the same curve. So I'm not actually making this prediction because it's machine learning or artificial intelligence. I'm telling you every great increase in productivity has followed this same curve. Initially, it impacts some jobs, and then there are new jobs. And that's what we're looking at here, except that now it's happening so much faster. So if you think about it, a 5-year period to completely reshape and transform procurement is a very short period of time.
Well, speaking of a period of time, your title, Chief Data Scientist for Strategic Procurement, that title may not have made any sense 4 years ago.
That's true. In fact, while I have been doing what I'm doing now for close to 30 years, it's had different names over time. Sometimes it's been in the area of content specialist or content lead. Other times it's been focused on how we're managing content in developing new products. And so, really, this title is new. It's relatively new to us in the field, and it's the most exciting place. It's the most exciting position I've ever had because things are moving so much faster and there's such great opportunity.
Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that the people who are data scientists have studied and learned a lot about procurement so that they can apply value in that direction for that set of functions. But what should the people who are in procurement know about data science? Because it seems to me that the more they can gain insight to the ability to gain insights, the more they can take advantage of it.
So when I interview people to be data scientists, one of the primary characteristics I look for is curiosity. It's not a technical thing. It's somebody who just wants to understand more of why something has happened and how do I leverage that. Procurement professionals in the future are going to have much more available to them because of the analytics, and much of that analytics will not require that you know math. It will be something that you can simply look at. For example, the Intelligent Enterprise Suite provides you with machine learning outcomes without you having to know how to get, all you have to do is navigate to them in reality. That's a great thing. So if you're trying to identify a trend, if you're trying to look whether or not you should substitute one product for another, those analytic capabilities will be there now. I was talking to, for example, the procurement, the buyer, who was responsible for staffing one of SAP's data centers, and he's also responsible for equipping it. And so when they buy these large servers that run HANA, they have different generations that they leverage, and they know which servers, and they know what the chip lifecycle looks like, but they've never been able to actually look at their own data and understand when and why. And with the kinds of things we're talking about now, you can actually look to see what's going on with different chipsets and their life cycles and make much more effective decisions.
Yeah, that's a fascinating example. And if you extrapolate from that to other types of buying, you're looking into your suppliers' very lifeblood variables and able to make deductions that either they wouldn't want to provide you or perhaps can't because they don't have access to the data. So tell us a little bit about how the procurement people should think a little differently when it comes to those what-if scenarios. Now that the tools are available, what are some of the characteristics of how the thinking of a procurement person should shift to take advantage of them?
Anybody who's negotiated a contract walks away, glad it's done, and you always think in the back of your head, what did I leave on the table? Perhaps the prices will go up. Perhaps the prices will go down. What can I do about that? Well, we introduced a product feature just recently in our strategic contracts module that allows somebody to not fix the price for a line item, but make it dynamic and have it be tied to a data science module so that we can look at the underlying commodities that are associated with what you're buying. And if the commodities change by a certain amount, you specify what that amount is. You negotiate that with your vendor. And then once you're done with that, you have a contract that doesn't leave that on the table anymore. So that's a pretty fundamental shift. That's how contracts get smart. And in fact, that's what this is. It's smart contracts that have dynamic pricing clauses.
Mm-hmm. So these concepts may have been very much at home in the City of London or on Wall Street when it comes to the buying and selling of financial instruments. We're able to apply this now much more broadly, more democratically, very powerful, but at a cost that's much more acceptable. So is that a good analogy? Should we look to what Wall Street did 5-10 years ago to what is happening in baseline procurement now?
Sure. So look for example, at arbitrage. In supplier risk, we take that concept and apply it. So you're trying to understand what to do with the risk. You start with inherent risk, and from that inherent risk, you try to reduce the risk by putting in place various practices. Sometimes it might be an actual insurance policy, so it could be a financial instrument you're looking at. Sometimes it's where you park the goods. Maybe they are on consignment. There are a whole host of new interesting ways that we can learn from the positives and negatives of financial services and apply them to procurement. Arbitrage is the first and and most obvious one. And I have talked to 100 customers who are implementing it in various forms, and they're all just a little bit different. So each individual company has their own goal. When you start thinking about somebody who is now in procurement and they're worrying and having to deal with currency fluctuations, right, that kind of role is just going to expand. It's not going to be just currency. It is also going to be arbitrage. It is also going to be various ways to shift risk out over a period of time, or even reel in exposure after you've signed a contract. That's also possible.
It seems silly to think of procurement as a cost center anymore. It seems so obvious now when you think about these implications that the amount of good to the top line and bottom line that procurement and supply chain management can do is substantial. Are there still people out there that see procurement as a cost center, and why would they?
Well, first of all, it's very comfortable. Right? You can demonstrate value by saving money, and it goes right to the bottom line. This is where it matters the most. So really the cost is always going to be a factor here. It is, as one particular CPO was telling me, he was saying that it's also been kind of a shell game, because you can't actually prove how much you really saved in reality, right? So what you can do is you can put together a model that shows how much you save. So I think as we move forward, we're going to find that cost is still part of the equation. I think it will always be part of the equation. But the opportunity sides and the ability to work more effectively with sales and even marketing is going to happen now. It's actually happening now. So you'll see more and more of it over the next 3 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm. So it's incumbent upon SAP Ariba to allow people in different companies to perhaps adjust to this at their own pace. So tell me a little bit about how analytics as a function is being embedded into your products in such a way that, one, it's in context to a process, but two, that people can sort of crawl, walk, and run towards how they take advantage of this. Rather than overwhelm them, what is it in the way that you're creating a user experience around analytics that allows them to be individuals in how they approach this? Again,
I'm going to point to the supplier risk example because I think it's a very good example. When somebody comes in and wants to adopt the SAP Ariba supplier risk solution, they most often come with a risk policy in place. In other words, they know how to measure risk. The challenges with measuring risk, however, are commonly access to the data. So integration is really hard. And when we went about building this product, we focused first on integration. And then after we did that, we thought, well, we could come up with a model. We can take this historic data and we can come up with a reference model, which is what we did. But then we really worked hard to make sure that any customer can change any aspect of that model according to their policy or according to whatever scenario they might be looking at. So, if you're somebody who's working in procurement, you've just acquired a company, you don't know what the risk looks like, you really need to be able to look at this information for the first time and migrate over time. And so with supplier risk, the models, both the predictive and descriptive models, are completely under the control of our customers. They can decide what data flows in and becomes a feature of that model, how much it's weighted, what the impact is, and how to interpret the impact when it's finished. I think those are the kinds of things we need to do. We also have to recognize that when you're talking about data outside of the organization now flowing in, big data, right, this is an unknown. And so it's not uncommon for somebody to look at the risk platform and say, turn off that external stuff so I can get my feet under the table, understand it, and then turn on this data that's flowing through and let me figure out how to combine them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's at SAP Ariba, that's what we're doing. We're giving the customers the tools to build workflow, to be able to build models, the ability to measure them, and now with the advent of the SAP Analytics Cloud, be able to integrate that into S/4HANA.
Okay. When we think about this as a high productivity benefit within an individual company, it seems to me that as more individual companies start doing this, that there's an added level, an abstraction, higher level of value when more and more organizations start sharing information. So mutually assured productivity, if a certain amount of sharing with proper governance is undertaken. Do you have any examples yet of where that's happening so that a marketplace or a region or a vertical industry or a subset are working in some sort of cooperative manner where the data analytics sharing is creating a step change in terms of broader productivity?
Sure, two examples. The first is that we provide a benchmarking program. The benchmarking program is completely free. All you need to do is participate. And as long as you're willing to share data, we'll share benchmarks. The data is aggregated, it's anonymous, and we make sure that the information is not something that can be re-identified. So, we take the proper precautions, and as a trusted party, a trusted host, we're able to provide that information so that you can benchmark various aspects of your performance. So you can get a very good idea on how long it takes to process a purchase order, what volumes of purchase orders you're using, how much of your spend is not managed because you don't have a purchase order in place. Those kinds of things are great for the benchmarking program. I think outside, when you look at it across industries, you'll find that mostly supply chains have become brittle. Because we have become lean and leaner, and ultimately we find that industries end up relying on one critical supplier. So, for example, black pigment for the automotive industry was really provisioned for all the major manufacturers by one supplier. And when that supplier had a plant fire and had to close down their plant for 3 months, because there was no inventory in the supply chain and because there was one supplier, it was a crisis. We actually saw that in our supplier risk product before it happened. It started out looking like a casualty on the plant, leading to a plant closure, leading to a crisis in the industry. And the industry had to come together and work with one another in order to solve that problem, to share their knowledge, just like they did during the financial crisis. So in the financial crisis, you found that it was necessary to effectively help other companies' suppliers. Traditionally, that would be called collusion, right? Traditionally, that is collusion, but done in complete transparency with the government. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at ways that this information can be shared and how industry can benefit collectively, that's the kind of thing we see, as well as emerging areas like sustainability. So in the areas like sustainability, you're looking to find ways to improve or reduce the use of forced labor. For example, in the fishing industry, the shrimp farmers have just, through their industry association, have just introduced a new model where they're going to collectively work to reduce the tremendous use of forced labor in the industry today. So there are examples. This is definitely happening.
You've dwelled quite a bit on the risk management side, and I know that you've come to market with that module and those capabilities. What's coming down the pike in terms of other capabilities that build on this data science brought to procurement value?
One of the most exciting things we're doing, I had mentioned earlier about contracts. One of the things that we are working on right now and just starting with customers literally this quarter, is being able to evaluate different outcomes across all of your contracts. So the example that we're using, the use case we're working on is that perhaps you have a cash flow shortage coming up at the end of the year, and it's necessary for us to curtail spend, maybe by terminating contracts. Maybe it's marketing. So we're going to pick some area like marketing, be able to narrow down, and we want to be able to evaluate what are the rights and obligations, and what is the real impact to the company of canceling contracts. There is no way to do this other than manually today. So if somebody were to if the CFO were to come to somebody in procurement and ask this question, bring in your paralegals, bring in your lawyers, start reading contracts. That's the only way to do this. And what we're doing right now is we're teaching machines to interpret that data, to evaluate the cause and effect, and then classify impact so that you can take action.
Move beyond blunt instruments into a more surgical understanding and also execution.
Right, and it really redefines context. So now we're talking about a context that is very interesting because you couldn't do it today. You can begin to evaluate different scenarios. Maybe you terminate. Maybe you push delivery. Maybe you renegotiate a specific clause in a contract. So these are just the very beginnings of great cases where procurement becomes much more strategic, much more able to respond to scenarios to help shape the organization.
Now, because when we spoke a little while ago about how this used to be in the purview of Wall Street, they had essentially unlimited resources to devote to machine learning and data centers and data science. Now we're making this as a service within a operating expense subscription model. It seems to me that we're democratizing this in a great extent so that small to medium-sized businesses that may have never had the resources to have their own data lakes and data marts and so forth are able to do this. Is that the case, that by making deep analytics as a service within the context of a business application subscription, now bringing some very powerful tools to people that just wouldn't have been able to do it before?
Yes. So the cloud providers create all kinds of opportunities, especially small to medium enterprise businesses, because they're able to buy on demand. And that's really, we don't call it that, but that's what it is. I'm able to buy what I need on demand. I'm able to negotiate the price based on whether it's on peak or off peak, and I'm able to get to the answers I need much more quickly. When I ran my own company, it was always cloud-based from the very beginning. And it was important that we have the ability to, use the resources when they were necessary. And what you're finding, especially with SAP, is that we're available on all of the clouds, right? So wherever our customers are, we'll be there with them. And that's what we're doing with Ariba, too, is that we will be available on all cloud platforms. And that will help our customers to right-size and work even more effectively on demand. I mean, really, SAP Ariba made that transition in 2008, and this is just the next generation. So we know a lot about how to do it.
And for those small to medium-sized businesses that now have this as a service, what sort of skills, what sort of cultural and organizational adjustments should they make in order to take advantage of it? It seems to me that it's all well and good to envision value, but to execute on it, maybe some changes on the ground need to take place. Any examples or thoughts about how some companies are already going about that?
It's interesting. When I talk to schools, I talk to undergraduates and graduates, and I find that many of those folks who are coming out of school have these skill sets. They've already learned Python, for example, and they've already built models. There's no mystery. There's no, voodoo kind of feeling about this. It's real because they've built them in the classroom. And so just like any other business decision, you want to hire your best people. You want to make sure that they slip in a couple of questions about data science as you're doing your interviewing, because it's the kind of thing that a product manager needs to know how to do, an analyst needs to know how to do, obviously IT needs to know how to do. And with the transition of the baby boomers into retirement, the millennials coming up, this new group is really talented. They really have those kinds of skill sets, and they're driven by opportunity. So as you continue to challenge them with opportunities, my experience is they continue to shine.
David, we've talked about this largely through the lens of the buyers. What about the sellers? Is there an opportunity for people who are looking for new markets to use data available to them in a business network setting, for example, to better be able to position themselves and get the business and satisfy the market?
Again, you need a platform. We're a good platform for them to look for these kinds of opportunities. I always find, as having been a small business owner myself, that the ability for me to identify opportunities that trigger business are really helpful. So from the perspective of being a small business person, you really want to be able to share information with your customers and understand how you can generalize those. I spoke to a small business owner who used Google Sheets. So all he would do is a real interesting idea. He had industries he served. He would write down at the end of every call, anybody on his team would write down on a call what they had learned about the industry so they could share it among themselves. They would write down the new opportunities that they had heard from in a separate section of the sheets, a different tab. What were the opportunities that they saw coming up next in their industry? And that's where they would focus their time in building a funnel, building a pipeline around it. When you're looking at it from that perspective, I think it's really useful. And so, use the tools that we have to provide that, to get into these RFXs, and you'll win.
Let's go back up a few thousand feet in elevation and look again at what people should expect to change in the not-too-distant future when it comes to the technologies that support data science. Are there any examples out there of organizations, partners of yours, customers that are at the vanguard of what others should expect? Perhaps some internal examples or external examples of where this is likely to go.
Here's the way I look at it. If you're going to think about how much money you could invest and bet in the future, maybe we have 7% of operating income to play with. That's about it. It has been common in the past for us to spread that over 4 or 5 or 6 different bets. I think now you have to look at it differently. right? You have to look at how you can use machine learning to validate your risks and your assumptions and validate your market, and then concentrate your investments. Take that 7% and get more out of it. That's how machine learning is going to help you. It's going to help you find your answers faster.
Mm-hmm. Looking to the future, again, before we close out, how should organizations get themselves ready? We've alluded to this quite a bit already, but there must be some other steps. What should the organization that wants to become more intelligent, the intelligent enterprise, the intelligent small to medium-sized business, what do you recommend that they do in order to be in the best position to take advantage of tools like what SAP and SAP Ariba are providing?
Historically, we've talked about what is your competitive advantage, right? That's something that we talked about in the 80s. And then we talked about learning as being your core competency. Now, in this time, it's who you know. It's your partnerships. So going back to what Google learned how to connect things together and make money off of it. Facebook one-upped them by learning that the relationships, and they learned how to make money off of those relationships. Going forward, your customer network and your supply chain are the basis for your differentiation. So, in order to plan for the future, what you really need to do is make sure that you have clear ways to collaborate with them, that you can really work to make the partners strategic, and to focus your energy and your bets on those partners that you believe are going to make you really effective. I think that when you look at one of the key enablers, it's going to be technology. It's going to be analytics. To me, that's kind of a given in these situations. You want to find somebody who is investing and looking forward and who is bringing in these new capabilities, whether it be something like Bitcoin or whether it be something that looks more like other transformations like how we make companies more network-driven.
So perhaps a variation on the theme of Metcalfe's law, that the larger the network, the more valuable it is. Maybe the more collaboration and the richer sharing, mutual assured productivity, if you will, the more likely you are to succeed.
Exactly. I don't think Metcalfe's law is over yet. I think you're going to find that, again, if you're just looking between now and 2020, that's where this is.
Well, very good. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a sponsored Briefings Direct discussion on how the powerful combination of deep analytics and procurement make businesses smarter and more efficient. And we've learned how a new standard or level of corporate behavior emerges when the latest data science techniques are applied to more data sets that impact supply chains and optimize procurement business processes. So a big thank you to our guest. We've been here with David Herman, Chief Data Scientist for Strategic Procurement at SAP Ariba. Thank you so much, David.
My pleasure.
And a big thank you to our audience as well for joining this Briefings Direct Modern Digital Business Innovation discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host throughout this series of SAP Ariba-sponsored Briefings Direct discussions. Thanks again for listening, and do come back next time.